Jonathan Roumie gave the Bible to Pope Leo XIV Prevost. What he did next shocked the world. But what happened next wasn't captured by the cameras. It happened behind the sacred walls of the Vatican, where the Pope thought only God was watching. And what Pope Leo XIV whispered to Jonathan in that moment will shatter everything you think you know about faith, power, and the man who leads 1.3 billion Catholics worldwide. The Pope didn't just accept that Bible. He opened it, read 3 words that Jonathan had written inside, and then did something that had never happened in 2,000 years of papal history. He fell to his knees before a man who plays Jesus and begged for forgiveness. But here's what will leave you speechless. Those 3 words weren't a prayer or a blessing. They were the same 3 words Pope Leo XIV had written in his own diary every single night for the past 15 years. The same 3 words that revealed the devastating secret he had carried since the day he was elected Pope. 3 words that exposed the truth about what really happened during his private audiences with world leaders, what he really believes about the existence of God, and why he was planning to do something that would destroy the Catholic Church forever. Jonathan Roumie walked into the Vatican that day, thinking he was meeting the most faithful man on earth. He walked out knowing he had just saved the soul of a man who had lost his faith completely, but had been too terrified to admit it. The Pope had been living a lie for over a decade, performing holiness while dying inside, blessing millions while secretly believing in nothing. But those 3 words in that Bible would change everything. They would expose the Pope's midnight confessions to an empty chapel, his desperate prayers to a God he wasn't sure existed, and the letter he had written but never sent, a letter that would have ended his papacy and sent shockwaves through every church, cathedral, and Christian heart around the world. It was supposed to be just another papal audience, another ceremonial blessing, another carefully orchestrated photo opportunity with a celebrity. The Vatican had choreographed this sacred dance 1,000 times before. Celebrities arrive through the bronze doors. They're escorted through marble corridors. They kneel before the Holy Father, receive his blessing, exchange pleasantries about faith and fame, then depart with blessed rosaries and a photograph for their social media. Simple, predictable, sacred. The Swiss guards knew the routine. The Vatican photographers had their angles planned. Even the Pope's schedule was blocked out in precise 15-minute intervals. Jonathan Roumie, star of The Chosen, was expected to follow the same script that every Hollywood figure before him had followed. But when Jonathan Roumie, the man who had brought Jesus Christ to life for millions of viewers worldwide, walked through those ancient Vatican halls, he wasn't carrying the usual gifts of gratitude or tokens of respect. He was carrying something that would expose the most dangerous secret in Catholic history. A secret that Pope Leo XIV had been hiding not just from the world, but from God himself. A secret so devastating that if it ever came to light, it wouldn't just end his papacy, it would shatter the faith of every Catholic on earth. The Pope had no idea that this meeting, scheduled as a simple blessing ceremony, would become the moment when his carefully constructed facade of faith would finally crumble. He had no idea that the man who played the Son of God was about to confront him with a truth so powerful it would force him to choose between his position and his soul. If Pope Leo XIV had known what Jonathan was really bringing to the Vatican that day, he would have canceled the meeting immediately. Because inside that worn leather Bible wasn't just scripture. It was evidence of the Pope's secret night confessions, his desperate letters to God, and the shocking admission he had made to his personal confessor just 3 days earlier. An admission that would change everything. The papal apartments had never felt so heavy with anticipation. Pope Leo XIV entered the ornately decorated receiving room, wearing his traditional white cassock, his papal ring catching the afternoon light streaming through stained glass windows that had witnessed centuries of Vatican history. Jonathan Roumie stood as protocol demanded, but there was something different in his eyes, something that made the Pope pause mid-step. The usual pleasantries began. "Your Holiness," Jonathan said, bowing respectfully, "it's an honor to meet the Vicar of Christ." But as Pope Leo XIV extended his hand for the traditional kiss of the papal ring, Jonathan didn't reach for it. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, weathered leather Bible. The same Bible he had studied every single day while preparing to portray Jesus Christ. The Pope's practiced smile flickered for just a moment, a crack so brief that only someone trained to read human souls would catch it. "Your Holiness," Jonathan said quietly, his voice carrying that same gentle authority that had moved millions in the Chosen. "I brought this for you." The words hung in the air like a prophecy. Pope Leo XIV stared at the Bible, and for reasons he couldn't explain, his hands began to tremble slightly. "That's very thoughtful," the Pope replied, his voice maintaining its ceremonial tone. But something in his chest tightened with an inexplicable fear. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to hold the very book that contained the words he had been writing in secret for 15 years. Words he thought no one would ever see. Words that revealed the crisis of faith that had been slowly destroying him from the inside out. Jonathan stepped closer, and as he did, the Pope noticed something that sent a chill down his spine. Jonathan wasn't looking at him with the usual reverence that everyone showed the papal office. He was looking at him with the same compassion he showed to broken souls in his television series. The same look Jesus gave to those who had lost their way. "Your Holiness," Jonathan said softly, "when was the last time you felt the presence of God without having to perform it for others?" The question hit Pope Leo XIV like a physical blow. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. In that moment, 30 years of carefully constructed papal authority began to crack. The ornate receiving room, with its priceless artwork and golden fixtures, suddenly felt like a confessional booth where his deepest secrets were about to be exposed. "I'm sorry," the Pope managed, his voice barely above a whisper, though they both knew he had heard the question perfectly. Jonathan didn't break eye contact. "Your Holiness, I've spent 3 years studying every word Jesus spoke, every gesture he made, every moment of doubt he experienced. And right now, looking at you, I see the same exhaustion I saw in his eyes during his dark night in Gethsemane." Pope Leo XIV's hands were shaking visibly now as he reached for the Bible. "I don't understand what you're implying," he said, but his voice cracked on the word implying. The facade was crumbling, and both men could feel it. Jonathan stepped even closer, his voice dropping to the gentle whisper he used in the most intimate scenes of The Chosen. "Your Holiness, 3 weeks ago, I had a dream about you." The admission sent shockwaves through the room. The Pope's eyes widened, his breathing becoming shallow. "A dream where you were standing alone in St. Peter's Basilica at midnight, performing Mass for an empty cathedral, going through all the motions of worship. But your lips were moving in a different prayer entirely. You were begging God to give you a sign that he was still there." Pope Leo XIV's breath caught audibly. His legs felt weak, and he had to grip the back of a nearby chair for support. "How could you possibly know about—" He started, then stopped, realizing what he had almost admitted. Jonathan held out the Bible with both hands, like an offering. "Because that wasn't just a dream, Your Holiness. That was God showing me your heart. And he told me to bring you this." The Pope stared at the Bible as if it were on fire. "What's inside it?" he asked, his voice filled with both terror and desperate hope. Jonathan's eyes filled with the same compassion he showed to every broken soul he encountered as Christ. "The same 3 words you've written in your private diary every night for the past 15 years. The words you think make you unworthy to wear the papal ring. If you're still here watching this moment that changed the Catholic Church forever, if you believe that some truths are worth standing up for, no matter the cost, go ahead and like this video and comment the word faith below. Let's see how many of us still believe that God's love is stronger than our doubts. Pope Leo XIV's face went completely white. His hands flew to his chest as if he had been shot. "Those words," he gasped. "No one knows about those words. I write them alone, in my private chambers, after everyone has gone to sleep." Jonathan nodded slowly, his expression filled with infinite tenderness. "Your Holiness, what if I told you that God sees every one of those midnight confessions? What if I told you that the 3 words you think disqualify you from the papacy are actually the 3 words that make you worthy of it?" The Pope was shaking uncontrollably now. "I don't believe," he whispered, the admission tearing from his throat like a physical wound. "I don't believe. I don't believe. I don't believe. That's what I write every night. Those are the 3 words that are destroying me from the inside out." The room fell into a silence so profound that even the Swiss guards outside seemed to hold their breath. Jonathan stepped forward and gently placed his hand on the Pope's shoulder. "Your Holiness," he said softly, "doubt isn't the opposite of faith. Performance is. You've been so busy being the Pope that the world expects that you've forgotten how to be the man that God called." Pope Leo XIV doubled over slightly, as if the weight of his confession was physically crushing him. "But I'm supposed to be certain," he cried. "I'm supposed to have all the answers. I'm supposed to be the rock upon which the Church stands. How can I lead 1.3 billion Catholics when I can't even convince myself that God exists?" Jonathan's voice became even gentler, carrying the same authority that had moved millions when he portrayed the Son of God. "Your Holiness, what if your doubt is exactly what the Church needs right now? What if your struggle is what makes you human enough to truly serve?" The Pope looked up at Jonathan with eyes full of tears and terror. "What's really in that Bible?" he asked. "What did God tell you to bring me?" Jonathan smiled, but it wasn't the smile of certainty. It was the smile of someone who had walked through his own valley of shadows and found grace on the other side. "The same thing he's been trying to tell you in those midnight hours when you think you're alone. You're not disqualified by your doubt, Leo. You're chosen because of it." Pope Leo XIV took the Bible with trembling hands, feeling its weight, its history, its purpose. As he opened it carefully, a folded piece of paper fell into his lap. It was yellowed with age, written in handwriting he recognized immediately but hadn't seen in decades. His own handwriting from 30 years ago, when he was just a young seminarian named Leo Prevost, full of questions and desperate for answers. "Oh my God," the Pope whispered, staring at the paper. "This is impossible. I wrote this when I was 25 years old, during my final year at the seminary." Jonathan nodded slowly. "Your spiritual director, Father Martinez, kept it all these years. He gave it to me the week before he passed away last month. He said he knew this day would come, when the young man who wrote those words would need to remember who he was before the world told him who he had to be." Pope Leo XIV's hands shook as he unfolded the letter. At the top, in his youthful handwriting, were the words, "For the priest, I'm afraid I'll become. If you're reading this, you've forgotten how to question. And questioning is what keeps faith alive." The Pope's breath caught. "I remember writing this," he said, his voice breaking. "I was terrified that ordination would turn me into someone who had to pretend to have all the answers." Jonathan's voice was barely above a whisper. "What else does it say, Your Holiness?" The Pope began to read aloud, his voice cracking with every word. "Dear future Father Leo, if you're reading this, it means you've become everything I pray I'll never become. It means you've traded wonder for certainty, questions for dogma, humanity for authority. You probably can't remember the last time you admitted you didn't know something. You probably can't remember the last time you sat in silence without feeling guilty for not praying. You've become a professional Catholic, and I'm terrified for your soul." The Pope stopped reading and looked up at Jonathan, tears streaming down his face. "How did I know?" he asked. "How did I know I would lose myself so completely?" Jonathan's eyes filled with sorrow and hope. Because even at 25, you could see what the institution does to the heart. You were trying to save yourself before you forgot you needed saving. Pope Leo XIV nodded, looking back at the letter with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "There's more," he said, his voice barely audible. "So much more." The Pope's voice trembled as he continued reading from his younger self, each word hitting him like a revelation. "I know you've forgotten what it feels like to pray without an agenda," he read aloud. "I know you've forgotten what it feels like to doubt without shame. I know you think you need to have all the answers because that's what they expect from a man of God. But Leo, that's not faith. That's pride. They're consuming your certainty, your authority, your perfect theology, and you're giving it to them because you're terrified of admitting that following Christ means walking in mystery, not certainty." The words echoed through the papal chambers like thunder. Pope Leo XIV's breathing became labored, his chest rising and falling rapidly. "Dear God," he whispered. He knew. That young man knew exactly what would happen to me. Jonathan leaned forward slightly. "What else does he tell you, Your Holiness?" The Pope's eyes scanned further down the letter, and his face went ashen. "He knew about the loneliness," the Pope said, his voice breaking completely. 30 years ago, he somehow knew. Pope Leo XIV's voice became barely audible as he read the next section. "I'm writing this on a night when I couldn't sleep, because I was terrified of becoming so isolated by reverence that no one would ever see me as human again. I was terrified that someday I would be surrounded by people who kneel before me but never truly know me. I was terrified that I would become so elevated that I would forget what it feels like to be loved for who I am, not what I represent." The Pope's hands shook so violently that the paper rustled loudly in the sacred silence. "Every night," he admitted to Jonathan, "every single night for 15 years, I've felt exactly this, surrounded by millions who revere the office, but completely alone as a man." Jonathan reached over and gently steadied the Pope's hands. "When did the doubt become stronger than the faith?" he asked softly. Pope Leo XIV closed his eyes tightly. "The day I realized I was more afraid of disappointing the Church than I was of disappointing God. The day I stopped praying for guidance and started praying for the strength to keep pretending I had it." The confession hung in the air like incense. The Pope looked back at the letter, his eyes widening as he reached the final paragraph. "He ends it with a prophecy," the Pope whispered. "A prophecy about this exact moment." Pope Leo XIV's voice became barely a whisper as he read the final section of his letter. "When you read this, you need to do 3 things. First, remember what silence feels like without the weight of the world's expectations pressing down on you. Go to the chapel at midnight when no one is watching and just sit with your questions instead of your answers. Second, find someone who sees Christ in you, not Caesar, and confess your humanity to them. Third, throw away the sleeping pills and remember that a restless night searching for God is more sacred than a peaceful sleep running from Him." The letter fell from Pope Leo XIV's hands as he stared at Jonathan in complete shock. "The sleeping pills," he gasped. "How could he have known about the sleeping pills 30 years before I started taking them?" Jonathan's voice was filled with gentle authority. "Your Holiness, when did you stop being able to sleep naturally?" The Pope's composure finally shattered completely. 8 years ago, he admitted, his voice breaking. "When the scandals hit their peak. When every day became about crisis management instead of shepherding souls. When I realized that the man in the white cassock wasn't me anymore, just someone I had to pretend to be 18 hours a day." The confession echoed through the papal chambers like an earthquake. Pope Leo XIV looked down at the letter scattered on the floor, then back up at Jonathan. "I can't," he whispered, shaking his head. "I can't do what he's asking. I don't know how to be human anymore. I've been the Pope for so long that I don't know where the office ends and I begin. I don't know how to have a crisis of faith when 1 billion people are depending on my certainty." Jonathan stood up slowly, and in a moment that would shatter 2,000 years of papal protocol, he knelt before Pope Leo XIV. The gesture was so unexpected, so profound, that the Pope gasped audibly. "Your Holiness," Jonathan said, looking up at him with the same compassion he showed to every broken soul in the Chosen. "You just did it. Right here, right now. You just chose to be human instead of infallible." Pope Leo XIV stared down at this man who played Christ, kneeling before him not in reverence for his office, but in recognition of his humanity. "But what if I'm wrong?" the Pope whispered. "What if God isn't there? What if I've built my entire life on a beautiful lie?" Jonathan smiled through his own tears. "Then you'll be wrong together with the rest of us who choose to love anyway." "But Leo," he said, using the Pope's given name for the first time, "what if you're wrong about being wrong?